Welcome back to the Shir in Sfas Emes after our Pesach break. The Shir actually has resumed in Kilat Chaverim in Yerushalayim, a wonderful shul that hosts the Shir, and in fact did take place last night. Unfortunately, I pushed the wrong button at the wrong time, so it was not recorded, which means that Min HaShamayim, I was supposed to review things a bit more and say the Shir again from home. So welcome to all those who are joining in this way as we go through the Sfas Emes again on some aspects of Parshas Tazria-Metzora. Let's start off by the very word Metzora. Metzora is the word that describes a person who has tzaras. Tzaras is that phenomenon which appears on a person's skin when the person is spoken Lashon Hara, as Chazal explain. The word Metzora is described by Mefarshim as being a compound word, motzi ra, one who brings out ra, one who brings out evil. Now, the Nesiv Shalom describes this almost as the fumes that come out from something toxic, meaning the fact that the person said Lashon Hara is, so to speak, the tip of the iceberg of the evil that's inside of the person. As we know, the Chafetz Chaim speaks about this at length, that Lashon Hara comes from very corrupt midos, very corrupt character traits, all sorts of combinations, whether it's hatred, whether it's arrogance, whether it's jealousy, all sorts of things are going on inside that are evidenced by speaking Lashon Hara. It reminded me a little bit of an ad that I heard once by a dental association telling people it's very important to get a regular dental checkup because sometimes a dentist can see just through things that are not healthy in a person's mouth evidence of internal diseases that you wouldn't detect otherwise. So over here, the tzaras is that detection of something bad which is going on inside. The Sfas Emes explains it differently in a few places. In Parshas Tazria, in the year Tov Reish Lamed Zayin, he explains that Metzora means that the person actually is taking out or detaching Ra, the evil which is inside of him. Okay, and he explains what's going on. He says, Dehine nimtza b'chol odom uv'chol davar tov v'ra kayadua. Said everything and every person has in it tov v'ra. That's part of creation. Okay, he says, Omnam kamoshe kilulin, but in the way that Tov and Ra were created and are combined in the entire system of creation, that is something which is good. That is something which serves the ultimate purpose for which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. As Chazal explained the Pasuk, at the end of creation it says, Vayar Elokim es kol asher osa v'hinei tov ma'od. He saw everything that he made, and v'hinei Tov mode, it was very good. And in the Medrash it says that Tov represents the Yetzer Tov. Ma'od, that which makes it very good, is the Yetzer Hara. It says, Ki kamoshehu, because as the Yetzer Hara was created and meant to be, hurak chelek mashu. It's only a fraction of an entire system. V'nizbatel, and it becomes subsumed in that entire system. Ach tzorich lizor shelo lotzio min haklal. But you have to be very careful not to separate and amplify, so to speak, the Yetzer Hara from that system in which it is contained and utilized in its way that it's supposed to be. As we say in Kriya Shema, that you serve Hashem b'chol levavcha, Chazal said, b'shnei yitzarecha, with both of your yitzarim. In Parshas Metzora, your Tov Reish Lamed Beis, the Sfas Emes says, Ki ma shenosan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yetzer Ra gam ken le'odam, the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave a person a Yetzer Hara, kamoshu bichlal, the way the Yetzer Hara is included in the sum total of that human being that Hashem creates, so then eino misnagid la'avodas Hashem. It's not something that opposes the service of Hashem, or so to speak, works against Hashem's creation of us as Ovdei Hashem. He says, but, once again, you have to be careful not to be motzio min haklal, not to separate it out. The Kli Yakar also explains Metzora in a similar way. Rav Yaakov Meir Shechter, Shlita, Rav Fishel Shechter, the great speaker in America, said he was once visiting Eretz Yisrael and he went to see Rav Yaakov Meir Shechter, the great Breslover, Magid Shir in Yerushalayim, and he asked him what's something he should speak about since he speaks publicly often. He says, tell people that it's okay to have a Yetzer Hara. Sometimes a person, when you discover that you have a Yetzer Hara, you're so horrified, but you have to realize that's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created you. The question is how it's managed, so to speak. The Sfas Emes also continues on with another image from the process of the Metzora's Tahara, his purification. He says, Ve'efsha shashnei tziporim chayos taharas. The Metzora brings two live tahor, pure, kosher, so to speak, birds. He says that these romzim al shnei yetzarim, these represent, so to speak, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. And they're both called alive and tahor. Shekamoshin asonam Hashem Yisbarach, the way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us those powers, him taharim, those things are tahor. They are clean and pure. Kamosha Omrim, as we say in the morning, neshama shenasata bi taharahi, the neshama that you placed inside of me is tahor. He says, Im ken yesh dai tahara tocha adam. That means that the person has the power of tahara inside of him, that the sum total of his spirituality is meant to come out tahor. Rak shelo yotzi shum dover mishosho. You have to be careful not to detach anything from its source. Okay? If we detach the Yetzer Hara from its place and from being controlled and ruled over and conquered by the good, then it becomes a very dangerous force. Now, this is something really that applies to any Avera. Any Avera means that we're taking the life force inside of us and we're letting the evil become dominant and take over, so to speak. Why is it that the Torah emphasizes particularly the influence of Lashon Hara in creating a person who's a Metzora, who unleashes this evil so much? In order to understand this, we have to understand a little bit better and in a deeper way what the power of speech is. Sfas Emes in Metzora, Taflesh Lamed Hey, says the following. He says, V'isa ki tzaras bo mi Lashon Hara. Tzaras results from Lashon Hara, which is motzira. What that means is, he says, you have to learn from the spirit, from the physical body, about the spiritual systems as well. He says, Yesh lilmod tikun hanefesh me'aguf. Just as you look at the way the body is supposed to work, you can understand something about the way the nefesh is supposed to work. He says, know that the ikar chiyus ha'adam b'leiv v'reya, that the primary sources of a person's vitality, the systems that are visible to us, that we see, that are constantly cycling life through the body, are the lev and the reya, the heart and the lungs. V'adam shenimtza b'lev, now the blood which is in the heart, mispashit b'chol ivarim, it is pumped and then spreads through each of our limbs, even to our fingertips and toe tips, v'chozer lalev, and then it returns to the heart. V'zeh kiyum ha'adam, that circulatory system keeps us alive. As the Torah says, domo benafsho. V'areya, and the lungs also work in a cyclical way. L'hotzi avir, the breath comes out. L'hachnis avir, and air comes in. So he says this is what happens in nefesh ha'adam as well. He says, Ikar kochan shel Yisrael b'peh. Chazal said that the main power of the Jewish people is in the mouth, is in the words. Now, it's important to note that we have a problem in terms of the way we deal with expressing words, reading words. We're trained from a young age not to say things out loud, to read quickly with our eyes and silently. A person who moves his lips when reading is often viewed as someone who's kind of intellectually slow. But the Torah's picture of how we are supposed to learn and daven is with expression, utilizing the force of our voice to the extent of our ears hearing that which we're learning. And this is something which is very powerful. He says, when you speak, it's the hoitzi mipnimius ha'adam diburim b'Torah, that when a person speaks, just as breath comes from inside of us, so too the words that we're bringing out from inside of us when we say words of Torah, these are words of life force that actually bring us life. As it says, Chazal tell us, the Pasuk Chaim Heim Lamotzaehem. In Masech HaZeruvin they explain that the words of Torah bring life to those who express those words, to those who bring them out. And he quotes the famous saying, Dvarim hayotzim min halev nichnosim el halev. In the footnotes in the Sfas Emes I have, that's attributed to Rabbeinu Tam. Words that come out from the heart enter the heart. Now, I'll explain first the more standard way of understanding that saying before going to how the Sfas Emes is going to explain it. The usual way is that if a person says something with their heart, if they're sincere, if they mean it, then other people will accept their words as well. Those words will affect other people. They tell a story about the Beis HaLevi, Rabbi Yosef Dov HaLevi Soloveitchik, the founder, so to speak, of that Soloveitchik dynasty. And they came to him once and told him that the maskilim, the new, so to speak, free thinkers, as they called themselves, were influencing many young Jewish people to abandon the traditional paths of Torah. And he said, I'm not surprised. And they were shocked. They said, why are you not surprised? Do you think there's something to what they're saying? He says no, but he said they're ernst, meaning they're sincere. They really believe in what they're saying. They really believe that what they're saying will bring about the salvation of the Jewish people, of humanity. He said if we were as sincere about what we're teaching, we would also be able to influence people. So that's a standard approach to that expression, Dvarim hayotzim min halev nichnosim el halev. Things that go out from the heart, enter the heart. The Sfas Emes explains it differently. It's not speaking about entering the hearts of others. It's speaking about entering your own heart, as he explains. He says, Pirush shekol dibur b'Torah shemotzi ha'adam karoi, that every word of Torah that a person expresses as it is meant to be expressed, b'chol libo, with all of his heart, nichnosin hein libo, they will enter his heart, umotzi b'hem tam chodosh, and then he will re-experience those words and be able to reconnect with them in a different way and taste them in a different way. And it's just like the heart which pumps out the blood throughout the body, and then it flows back into the heart, and there's a new process that goes on and takes place again. The Beis Aaron of Karlin explains in his explanation of the Haggadah of Pesach something that really adds another dimension to the famous style of davening that you find in Karlin Stolen Hasidim. They daven very loud. It could be called screaming even. Not just screaming with the mouth, but it's a whole body experience that gets into it. Now, some of the explanations I'd heard that when people criticize this way of davening, again, it's not every part of davening, they're silent in Shemon Esrei, that, why are you doing that? It seems in Sfarim that you're not supposed to be screaming so loud, etc. So they give two answers. Number one is that when you're screaming, you're not sleeping. And we tend to be people who are constantly falling asleep. Number two is that when the house is on fire, you scream. Okay, there are times in which it's appropriate to scream. And they viewed our state as one in which you have to be screaming. But the Beis Aaron, let me actually open it, on the Haggadah of Pesach, it says the following. In the Halach Ma'anya, when we say, Kol ditzrich yeseh v'yifsach, someone who is needy should come and do the Pesach. What is his need? He says the need here is a spiritual, and mishet tzarich letakin ve'eni odea klal chesrono. A person knows, I have to fix, I have to improve, I have to heal, but I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what and how to work on. Yeseh v'yifsach, he should come v'yifsach. Right? Many Sfarim explain that the word Pesach means Pesach, the mouth that speaks. Sheyedaber diburim lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Speak before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, because be'emes kol advarim ein be'efshari letaken rak al yedei diburim shemedaber lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Speech is the key to all. You aren't able to fix anything without speaking these words before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hein Torah or Tefillah, whether words of Torah or words of Tefillah. Rak sheyeh im chiyus habore. However, he says, that has to be done with the life force that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put inside of you. Meaning, the words are there, but they're somewhat not alive. There are different ways to say things. You can say things where you're simply activating your vocal cords, or you can say things where the very divine life force inside of you is awakened and then enters those words. And then he says, Ki chayim heim lemotzayim b'pei, brings that drasha from Chazal. Then they bring life to the ones who speak them, right? And do that. So he says, again, you have to be yachnis b'chol devarim v'adiburim shelo hachiyus shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That life force of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, zeh ikar Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that's actually an aspect of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Okay, so he says a person has to try, lahach Yosef's nafsho. You have to try to awaken, right, and bring to life your nefesh. Ulahalos hakol bator limkoro. And by doing that, you're connecting the words of Torah or Tefillah that you're saying to their source, because their source really exists inside of you. Their source is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the neshama, which is a chelek elokam mimal, which is a portion of divinity inside of us. And if you can connect that to those words, and then by doing that, you're able to connect those words to their source, and they come alive, and they have power, and then that power changes and transforms you, and is nichnas el alev, and it enters you, and it brings life. Chaim hem lemotza'ehem. So this is the power of speech. Now, obviously, if this works in the positive way, there's also the negative side to it as well. As the Sfas Emes goes on to explain. He says, V'chein kamochen lehepech motzira. Now the one who speaks words of evil, especially Lashon Hara, where he speaks ill of others, where he brings others to arguments and machlokas, he says, where's that coming from? Hu sheyesh gam kein yetzer hara b'leiv ha'adam bismola. Just as we said, the heart has positive power in it. Chazal say there's in the left side of your heart, left representing weaker, right, as opposed to the dominant right side of the heart, where the Yetzer Tov is. This is the Yetzer Hara. As it says in Koheles, Leiv ksil bismolo. The heart of a fool is on the left side. Now, kshemotzi hevel smoli bachutz, when you use that power of speech, and especially if it's done with passion and enthusiasm, you're bringing that out into reality. Machnis bo ruach shtus. Then it's also nichnas el alev. It comes into your heart as well. It's toxic. Those very fumes poison you. And therefore, that brings more ra into the person, and the ra separates from its source and becomes a dominant force. And this is the world of the motzi ra. That's how, as it says in Mishnah, Mavis v'chaim biyad haloshon. Death and life are in the hands of the tongue. And the Tanchuma says, Asak batorah zachal l'chaim. When you're involved with words of Torah, and again, words of Torah can be very broad, all sorts of positive words. That means positive words of encouragement to others, words of chesed, of kindness. Zachal l'chaim. Then you get life. The Torah is an eitz chaim hi l'machzikim bo. And, says the Tanchuma, hu refu'oso shel lashon hara. That is the cure for lashon hara. Because it says in Mishlei, marpei lashon eitz chaim. The eitz chaim, which means the Torah, is the marpei lashon, that which heals the tongue. In the Gemara Erchin it says, the boy chaim belishnei, the boy mavis belishnei. Someone who wants life can be achieved through the tongue. One who wants death, also. Rashi explains, what does it mean? You can get life with your tongue, osek batorah. Mavis, death through the tongue. Yasok b'divrei shtus nevola. When a person utilizes his speech for things of foolishness and negativity. So now we have a pathway at least to try to see how the Metzora makes his way back. how, if he's in this cycle where he speaks evil and that awakens the evil and makes it stronger and more predominant, how does he get out of it? Interestingly, the Nesiva Shalom speaks about the pasuk where it says, V'huva el ha-kohen. It says that the Metzora will be brought to the Kohen, implying someone else is bringing him. He says there the Torah is actually showing us a solution to people who are caught in a cycle of negativity. There's an idea of Eino chavush mater atzmo in beis ha'asurim. A person who's in prison usually can't free himself from prison. When a person's caught up in a cycle, the very fact that they're stuck in that cycle means that they can't get themselves out. So there are two things that can help. V'huva, meaning if you have friends who can help you step out of that cycle. El HaKohen, that can be a tzaddik, someone who is able to reach you, help you, see things differently, elevate, learn how to fix. Those are two important steps, he said, for getting out of negative cycles. But here, if we go just to this concept of what it says in the pasuk, Marpe lo shonei tzchaim, we find a problem. Okay, on one hand it says, what's the refuah of the lashon? It's Torah, but there's a medrash in Vayikra Abba which says the following: Zos tiyeh Torah ha-Metzora. This will be the Torah of the Metzora. And the medrash brings a pasuk, Hado dichsiv. The pasuk in Tehillim says, V'lo Rasha Amar Malacha l'saper chukai. To the Rasha, Hashem says, who are you to speak in my laws? The Medrash continues, Amar Rabbi Levi, he says, Matzinu, we find sources in the Torah, Nevi'im, and the Ksuvim, She'ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu chafetz b'kiluso shel adam rasha. Hashem doesn't want the praise of a person who is a rasha. And the source that he brings from Torah is from the Metzora. The Metzora is told, Val sofam ya'ateh, he has to let his mustache grow, which implies we're covering over his mouth, closing his mouth. And what does the Metzora say? V'tomei tomei yikra. When he's banished from the machne, when he's banished from the camp, he has to stand there and he has to call out, Tomei tomei, I am tomei, warning people to stay away from him. The Maharazu, the Perush on the Medrash, explains that Rabbi Levi's understanding of the pasuk is that it's defining what the Metzora is to say and what he isn't to say. Yikra dvarim tomeim, he has to speak about the fact that he's tomei. V'lo dvarim kedoshim, but he shouldn't speak things of kedusha, l'saper gedulasi, to praise Hashem, v'limod torasi. So now, what is the Metzora to do? He is banished in order to embark on a teshuva process, and we see that the only way to reverse that process of negativity that he caught himself in is words of Torah and tefillah and positivity. And yet the pasuk seems to say, but how can you do that? And it kind of makes sense to us, because he's damaged his mouth, it's contaminated. How do you say these things of purity and holiness with something which is so contaminated? The Sfas Emes gives us a very important answer, which is key to our avodah in many ways. He says, Ach gam ze emes. It's also true, shal yedei Torah yecholin letaken atzmenu gamken. Despite all of this, we are still able to repair the damage with the Torah, to repair ourselves. Hagam she'ein oskin karaoi, with the understanding that it's not Torah as it's meant to be. It's not Torah coming from a pure place, from a pure mouth. Ima kavona l'shem shamayim. But if the kavona is l'shem shamayim, if the purpose of my learning is because I want to exit the negativity, I want to enter the world of the positive, I want to bring health instead of illness into my neshama, I want to draw close to Hashem instead of distant, then that can help. This is what Chazal meant, Medrash Eicha, HaMa'or Sheba Machziron Lemutov. The light of the Torah can bring people back to the good. Now again, this is only if they approach it, as the Sfas Emes said, l'shem shamayim. Right? I've often said that the word ma'or, the Baal HaTanya writes, there's a difference between or and ma'or, between light and ma'or, which means the source of light, like the sun. If a person realizes that the Torah is the source of light, and he wants to absorb that light, and he wants to drive away the darkness, then even though he has not changed himself yet, he needs the Torah to change himself. HaMa'or Shabbat, that source of light which is in the Torah, will bring him back to good. But if a person is just academically studying Torah knowledge, that won't necessarily do anything for him. It may even harm. So this is what the Metzora can do. And the Sfas Emes continues and quotes the pasuk from Yeshayahu. Bari niv Sfasayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the power of speech. La'rochok v'la'karov amar Hashem v'la'fasiv. For the one who is distant and for the one who is close, Hashem said, I will heal him. Meaning that there is a Torah of the one who is close, but there's also the Torah for one who is far. The Metzora has those Torah Metzora. He has his Torah. It's the Torah of the one who's far. It's the Torah of one whose neshama isn't pure, whose mouth isn't pure, whose mind isn't pure, but who wants to purify, who wants to get close. And that Torah will bring him close. Hashem says, Urfosiv, and I will heal him. The Sfas Emes says that it could be, B'derech Remez, he says, it's like a hint. We find an interesting contradiction in the Psukim. On one hand, it says, V'huva el ha-kohen, that the Metzora is brought to the Kohen. But it also says, V'yotza ha-kohen el ha-Metzora, the Kohen goes out to the Metzora. Who's going where? So he says that when the Metzora is involved in the Torah of the Rachok, of the Torah of the one who is distant, and he's learning L'Shem Shamayim, he says the nitzot, the spark of that Torah, comes to the Kohen. It makes the Kohen aware of the Metzora and the fact that the Metzora is transforming, and that it's time for him to go out to the Metzora and to see his progress and to help him in his way back. So this is something that's a problem in general, in so many ways. The Yetzer Hara tells a person, right, who wants to do some mitzvah, how are you going to do a mitzvah? With that hand that didn't have you're going to do a mitzvah? With those eyes that didn't have you're going to do a mitzvah? With that mouth, etc. Pushing us into the sense that we can never get out of the cycle. That's not true. There's the Torah of the Rachok. There's the Torah HaMetzora. And that applies to all of us in all these ways. As long as it's L'Shem Shamayim, as long as one wants to grow close. Qualitatively, it may not be the ideal Torah, but it's the Torah for that situation. And it's the Torah for you. And it's Urafosiv. It brings refuah. It reminded me of a beautiful Perush I saw. I'm trying to remember where I saw it. Just this Pesach. On the Pasuk in Tilim, Mina Meitzar Karosika Anoni Bamerchavka. Hashem, I call out to you from the Meitzar, from a point of restriction, of tightness, of limitation. Answer me Bamerchav, in the great wide openness. Now, I usually understood that, and I thought many people understood that as well, is that when a person is in a tight place, they finally scream out to Hashem. They finally call out to Hashem with all their heart, and then He answers us b'merchav. But this parish touched on a beautiful thing. If you think about it, when a person's really going through difficulty, they don't have the strength to scream out to Hashem. They don't have the strength to call out. They're beaten and depressed and worn down and frightened and all of these different things. And part of what tortures them is they say, if only I would cry out to Hashem properly, He would answer me. But they try and they can't. They just can't. Mina Meitzar Karasika, Hashem knows that. You call it from the Meitzar, it's very limited. And what comes out in that call to Hashem isn't very impressive looking. But if you want to reach Him, if you want to grow close, even if it's limited in that way, Anani b'merchavka, He answers us with the merchav. So this is the world of the Metzora that even if we don't have actual tzaras now, teaches us so much about the process of healing, of attaching to the positive when we've attached to the negative, of connecting to our source, of putting that Yetzer Hara in its proper place so that its energy is ruled over and utilized by the Yetzer Tov, and it's where Hashem meant it to be in the system. The richuk, the distancing of the Metzora, is actually the tikkun. That enables him to get things back in balance. That gives him the push to learn the Torah of the Rachok that he's supposed to learn, to identify what has gone wrong and to be able to put it back in its place. I want to finish just with a beautiful image the Baal Shem Tov said in the Baal Shem Tov al Torah, where he explains what Chazal said, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to us with two hands, kavayochel. There's the small docha, the left hand which pushes away, and the yamin, the stronger hand, which is mekarevis, that draws us close. He said, where do we sense these things in our lives? He says, if a person has ever said a bracha and actually felt and experienced what he's doing, when you say the words Baruch Ata Hashem, that you are actually addressing now personally Ata Hashem, the creator of all, the eternal, he says that is experiencing the Yamin Mekarevis, the right hand of Hashem that embraces you. When do we experience the small docha, the left hand that pushes us away? We feel it so often when you want to daven Shmoneh Esrei and you really want to focus, but then as you start davening, you feel an itch from a mosquito bite that you got last night, and you think, oh, I don't have any mosquito repellent at home. Summer's coming, I should really get mosquito repellent, so I should probably go to the drugstore. If I'm going to the drugstore, I should probably check with my wife if she needs anything from the drugstore, and maybe I should just check that my prescriptions are up to date with the doctor. And by the time you finish going through your drugstore inventory, it's already time to step back, Osa Shalom. And the person looks at himself and says, how did that happen? I had so much to daven for today, and I really wanted to daven. And I came on time, and I wanted to prepare for Kavana. And it's just not natural. I don't usually sit here daydreaming about pharmacy shopping lists. He said, that is the small docha. That is Hashem pushing you away. But, he says, remember two things. When someone pushes you, they're very, very close to you. They have to be. They're actually touching you. And remember that it's only the left hand which is pushing you. And the purpose of that push is simply to awaken you so that the right hand can draw you close as is meant to be. Zos Tazria-Metzora. There's so much that we can learn from this and so much that can give us strength and encouragement as we're constantly trying to make our way back to closeness to Hashem. Wishing everyone a wonderful Shabbos.